Hi there. This is going to be a little bit of an unusual Make It Monday. It won't be a full project, partly because I've just run out of day, but from time to time across the process of this segment, I'm going to do some really basic beginner quilt blocks. I get a lot of people asking me for beginner stuff and beginner quilt blocks in particular. So today I want to show a really quick and easy way to make a 4-patch. Now 4-patch is one of the most basic and simple patchwork blocks, and for many people you won't need any instructions on how to do this, but I'm just going to run you through a very quick tutorial on making these. So I have these gorgeous florals. They're on my website if you want to pack. I've got plenty. So they're a 5-inch charm square. So looking at the ruler, so they will finish a finished size of 4.5 inches if I do nothing but sew the edges, which is what I'm going to do. So the whole charm pack's pre-cut at 5 inches, and what I want to do is I want to create a 4-patch that's going to offset these. So I want to be able to put a 4-patch of my black and grey amongst the purples and greens and hot fuchsias that I've got going on here. So if I'm going to do 4.5 inch finished, just move those out of the way, I need to cut a square if I was doing a square as a 5 inch. So if I was just alternating squares, obviously I'd cut them the same size as my charm squares and I would alternate them. I'm going to do a 4.5 inch finished block. So in a 4-patch you've got 2 strips with, or 2 rows of 2 squares, so black, grey. So I need to work out the size of my strips at half the size of what I want it finished. So 4.5 finished, 2.25 finished for my 2 strips, and I need to add 1/2 inch to that measurement. So I need to cut strips at 2 3/4 inches to create my strips. So let me go through that again. 5 inches, when I do my 1/4 inch seam all the way around the edges, is going to come down to 4.5 inches. If I want to do 2 rows where I alternate my colours, they need to be finished 2 1/4, 2 1/4 to add up to the 4.5. So I'm just going to take my bolt of fabric and I want to cut my strip at 2 3/4. So I'm just going to fold that into 4. I have just trimmed off this edge here so I know that that's all even and straight. Don't ask me how, I made a mistake, so we're doing it again. So 2 3/4. 1, 2, 2.5, 2 3/4. So I'm using the whole of the width of the fabric because I'm going to need to make quite a lot of blocks. And this is the quickest, most efficient way to do it. I'll pop that over there with my pinks. I'll come to my black. So move my cup of tea so I don't knock it over all over the fabric. And again, fold my bolt in half. If you're not working on a bolt, you don't obviously need to have the whole thing. Just fold your fabric from selvage to selvage and then in half again. I'm going to cut this one at about 3 because I just want to make sure I even up that edge. So straight up here, straight down here. I know this is going to be a straight edge. If I flip this around, I can tidy up any loose edges. So 2 3/4. 1, 2, 2.5, 2 3/4. Cut that in half. Now, just pop this aside for now. I haven't done any maths on this quilt yet, mainly because I haven't worked out how big I want to make it. It's only going to be a lap quilt, but I haven't worked out how big I want to make it. So basically now what I'm going to do is I've got the two colours for my 4-patch. So I'm going to go to the machine and I'm going to sew those together with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to lose a 1/4 inch on both sides all the way along. And then I'll come back and I'll show you the next step. Right, so I have stitched my black strip to my grey strip, and I have ironed my seam allowance towards the black, simply because it's darker. No other reason. So by cutting these two strips at 2 3/4, I've now taken 1/2 inch out, two sets of 1/4 inch. So my seam here, 1/4 inch seam, has taken a 1/4 inch of the black away and a 1/4 inch of the cream, and now I have a 5-inch strip. So you can see that that's the same size as my 5-inch squares. So that's good, I've got the width right. So now what I want to do is I want to cut my halves, my gosh, I can't even speak, my sewn together strips, and I want to cut them into 2 3/4 inch pieces. So if I come in here, I line this up for 2 3/4, and then I cut the second one. I'm just going to do the 2 3/4. I'm just going to do one block to show you, and then I'm going to come back and do some more. So 2 3/4 strips. Now the reason why I've done this way is because it's a really efficient way to stitch your 4-patch blocks together, because all I now have to do is simply turn that around and I have my 4-patch ready to sew. Most importantly, because I've ironed them all towards the black, as I layer my pieces together, I can butt my seams and I can feel that the seams are neatly sitting together and are lined up. And it means that I can do multiple numbers of blocks all in one go. So I'm just going to go and stitch this and come back, and then I'm going to cut the rest of the row and see how many I get out. I should do the calculations first, but I'm doing it the wrong way around because, well, I'm just doing it the wrong way around because I'm being lazy. So I'm going to go and stitch that on the edge, give it a press, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've stitched the two layers together, butted my seams to make sure that I've got a good point, and I've now got a 5 by 5 inch block. So as I go along, I can alternate my blocks with my florals. Not quite lined up, but get the general idea. So now we just need to work out, do the maths by the measurements. So I'll just trim this off and then we'll cut our pairs. Now if you were doing a scrappy quilt, obviously you can't do it like this. This technique works the best when it's got the two the same block. You're using the same block over and over again, alternating just the two fabrics. Or you could do a series of these strips and then factor it all in. If you're doing a scrappy quilt though, you'll need to cut your 2 3/4 inch squares, stitch them together, and then 2 3/4, stitch them all together and then come back. But if you're doing something that's just single colours, or 2 single colours and you're alternating, this is by far the most efficient. So that's 3. One, 2, 3/4. At the moment they're right, just stop. So just keep going a bit more. It's 5 blocks out of one strip. 6. 7. I won't get an 8th block, but I'll get 7.5 blocks out of each strip across the width of the whole fabric. So 7.5. Once I've stitched all of those up, I can then sew this in place, alternating my fabrics to create my rows. So I'm going to go and do the 7 blocks that I've got here and stitch them, and I'll come and show you the basic layout of what I'm doing, and then in a couple of days I'll show you the finished quilt. Right, so here you can see how the quilt would start to come together. So if I start mixing my squares with my alternating 4 patches, I'll stitch my rows together, and I'll stitch all my squares together to make my rows, and then I'll stitch the rows together to make my quilt. But you can see it's a really effective, very quite dynamic, dramatic, very basic and quick and easy quilt. So I'll give you and I'll do a quick measure of what size quilt this is going to finish as, and the amount of fabric required for the 4 patches using my 5-inch charm squares, just so you've got an idea. And then towards the end of the week I'll get this finished and I'll show you a picture of the finished quilt top. It won't be a quilt by then, and you can have a look and see. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that basic introduction to the 4 patch. So just to run through the maths again in a generic sense, whatever the finished size block you require, divide it in half. So not the measurement that you cut, but the finished size. So this is 4.5 finished. I could do a 9-inch finished block, which means I'd cut them at 4.5 inches, and then I'd add ½ an inch to whatever that finished size is. So finished size of the block divided in half, so I'll get my 2 strips, and then add ½ an inch to each strip to give you your seam allowances. And then whatever it is that you cut your strips at, when you've sewn them together, you should have the right finished size width of your 2 strips sewn together, and then you cut each set of the strips at that same size. So if we're doing a 9-inch square, we cut 2 9-inch square. It's 4.5 inches finished, 4.5, 4.5. So I need to cut 2 5-inch strips. When I sew them together, I lose ½ an inch, and I should have 9.5 inches wide. And then when I sew my 4 patches into my quilt, I'll lose another ½ an inch, and I'll have 9 inches finished. So whatever size finished square you want, whatever the finished size square, work out what half it is and add that ½ an inch. Alright, I'll write that all down for you. I'll come back and show you the rest of this a little bit later.